Okay, I think we're mostly settled here. So perfect. Thank you so much for coming to my session for your last one of the day today. I hope you had a really good one earlier for your first section. There's lots of really cool stuff going on. And of course, later on you'll be able to access and take a look at the other sessions. So don't feel sad if you've missed one that you really wanted to see. So thanks again for coming. I am going to be sharing my PowerPoint presentation during the workshop. So, but afterwards you will get, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, I'm sure Sophia will get that out to you as well too. So don't worry about having to write all of the things down. We're not a huge group here. So if you have any questions during the workshop, if you want to just ask them, that's fine. If you would like to type them into the chat, our lovely friend Erin is going to be monitoring the chats here. So if there's anything that you want to ask, definitely let me know. All right. All right. We're just perfect. Okay, that was a good reminder. Thanks, Joyce. Okay. We will share our screen here too. Oh, 1 second. I just realized that I need to just put it on the right slide here. I tell you, from the beginning. Here we go. That's going to work now. Had to reset there. Perfect. All right, here we go, friends. So delighted that you decided to come and join us for this session. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do, supporting young people, supporting out of school programming. It's really great, and it means so much to the kids. So thanks again for all of that you do, and thanks again for thinking about how we can make sure that the young people are safe and cared for, and that we're trying to create safe spaces for young people to support them while we have our time with them. So, and you're very important to the young people in your community and the ones that you serve. So thanks again for all of that you do. So a little bit about me. So my name is Monique, and I work at the Today Center as a family violence education specialist. I have been I'm a social worker, and I've been working in violence prevention work here in the community for about 15 years. So I've been with the Today Center for 5 years, and previous to that, I was actually with the Canadian Red Cross, working with communities on how to talk to teenagers and children about, healthy relationships, child abuse prevention, bullying. And so I now in the work that I do at the Today Center, it's a little bit different because I'm working with adults now, but working with young people and teenagers and kids is really near and dear to my heart, as the OST conference as well too. Many years ago, I used to be a part of it, so it's just delighted to be asked back. So thank you again for everybody, and to the OST conference for all of the awesome work that they do. This is so great, and it's free. It's fantastic, right? This is just a reminder that, we are going to be talking about different types of child maltreatment. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. I'm going to try to do it in a way that's safe, just to give you some information around that. But know that, even if we're the most prepared, that sometimes feelings come up that we're not anticipating. And, and if that happens, that's okay. Do what you need to take care of yourself. If you need to connect with somebody to talk to them right away, you can connect with 211. They'd be able to do a debrief with you as well too, or you can just connect with me afterwards, and I can provide you with some of those supports as well too. But just take care of yourself and know that your feelings are valid, and if something comes up, that's totally okay. And I just want you to be aware of that, and just to do what you need to take care of yourself. So just on talking about that, today we're going to be talking about it's going to be giving you some definitions of some different kinds of violences that might happen against children, some different kinds of maltreatment that are happening. We're going to talk about duty to report. What are our legal responsibilities for protecting children? We're going to talk about what make things difficult for children to share that they need support or help. What happens if a kid tells us something that we're surprised by, how to handle disclosures, and as well going to give you a few community resources as well too at the end. So before we get going, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about where I work. So where I work is actually, we're called the Today Center, and we're an organization that supports people who are experiencing family violence. So we're likely not going to be the first people you connect with in these particular situations, because we are about supporting parents and adults who are experiencing family violence. But if that's something that comes up in your life, comes up with the families that you're working with, we are definitely a non-judgmental, supportive, safe place for people to connect with, to access support and help, so that, you know, if you are, if you think we might be a good resource as well, you can also do a community consultation. So if you are working with a family and maybe you have some questions, you're not sure, you could always connect with us and do a consultation, or you can invite the family to connect with us, the parents who connect with us, if they might need some extra support or help that's happening. We do have, you know, you can go to our website, thetodaycenter.ca. We also have Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, so you can check us out on different social media platforms as well if you'd like to stay connected. So just a little, you know, thinking about kids, thinking about, you know, why are we thinking about this for young people? So we want to remember that, you know, children are the smallest, you know, they're the most dependent members of our society. They rely on us adults, mentors, you know, family members, community members to really make sure that they are getting all of the help and care and support and guidance and mentorship that they need in order to be safe and happy, and you know, grow up to be really, you know, happy citizens within our communities. So, you know, children, especially the younger they are, the more they depend on us. But, you know, we really are, we need to make sure that we're all looking out for all of the children in our care. That, of course, if young people, children or young people are experiencing violence, no matter when it happens, that, you know, this really does have a long-term impact, you know, after, not even just when kids are younger, but, you know, when kids grow up as well, too, this does have a long-term impact. So, you know, the faster we can get supports in, if a family or a young person needs supports or help, you know, the quicker we can do that, the younger we can do that, definitely it's going to be more helpful for them on their healing journey in order to help them, support them the best we can around that too, right? Like, and that, you know, that all young people really do deserve that support and help. So we do need to want to be there for them. And then, of course, you know, we have a responsibility to protect children. We have a legal responsibility to protect children, a moral responsibility that, you know, we really do need to remember that it takes all of us to make sure that kids are safe in our communities, that they are getting all of the things that they need in order to grow up safe and happy and healthy, and that we are responsible for that. Okay. So to make sure that we're on the same page here, I just want to go over a couple of definitions here. So the first definitions is actually like the definition of what's a child. So here in Alberta, anybody who is up to, you know, the age of their 18th birthday is considered a child. So I used to work with teenagers, which was the most fun thing in the world, right? And you know, sometimes those young people were taller than me, and they had like facial hair, right? But they were still under 18. And so sometimes, especially if you're working with older young people, you know, we want to remember that they are still legally considered children up until they turn 18, regardless of how much facial hair they have, and that they are, you know, that there are extra protections, extra supports, because we do know that even if they're tall, that, you know, developmentally, they still need all of that care and support and attention, which is why we do have those protections for young people up until they turn 18. Sometimes people have confusions around, you know, the teenage years, but nope, you are considered a child until your 18th birthday here in Alberta. And, you know, thinking about what child maltreatment is, it includes all types of physical and or emotional ill treatment, sexual abuse, neglect, negligence, exploitation, which results in actual or potential harm to the child's health, survival, development, or dignity in the context of a relationship of responsibility, power, and trust. And so if we're looking at all different kinds of violence, all different kinds of maltreatment, um, the key thing is really that relationship of trust, but also that power and control. So somebody within that person, that child's life, is misusing their power and control over them. And so thinking about what our relationships are, just having a relationship with a child, really there is an inherent level of power difference, right? So if I'm a teacher, if I'm a dentist, if I'm a mail carrier or a bus driver, or somebody who works in a child's school, right, there is that relationship of power, right? Because we do have responsibilities and lots of different things, and we need to remember that we don't want to misuse that power, that we want to use that power to support and help as much as possible. And that, when I used to teach kids about child maltreatment, you say, it is the responsibility of all adults to take care of kids. And if an adult has broken that promise, because we all keep that promise, that and another adult needs to know. So we all need to make sure that we are making sure that kids are safe, that we're supporting our colleagues as well too, around ensuring that all of the kids are safe in our care, and that we really do have that relationship to use that power for good when we're working with kids. Here is my little thing. Okay. So we're looking at different types of maltreatment. These are 4 very broad categories. There are lots of different ways, unfortunately, that people misuse their power and trust in ways that are harmful for children. And, we often like to categorize them. I'm going to be talking about them just a little bit more so you have more of a context. But, don't be stressing about too much if you're like, I can't remember if this is that, or if it's emotional or physical, right? Don't worry too much about that. What we just want to start to notice is, if somebody's misusing their power, if a child is being harmed, we just want to start to have that understanding about what that looks like for that individual child, because every situation is different, every person is different, and so we just want to remember that in that context. And sometimes the different types of maltreatments can overlap as well too, so we don't need to be thinking about this like a math quiz, because sometimes there can be many different things. So having an exact label is not as important right now. It's just understanding when a child might be experiencing harm. So we're thinking about emotional abuse. This one can be a really hard one because it's the hardest to notice often. It's really underreported. It's the easiest one to hide as well too. So, but this one really is important to remember because it can have, serious mental or emotional harm on a child. This is really about, abuse that takes the form. It can be of verbal attacks, repeated humiliation, rejection, anything that's happening verbally. So everything that's not happening physically, right? Which can be a whole bunch of things, right? Rejecting, ignoring, isolating, degrading, terrorizing, corrupting, exploiting, lots of different ways that a child might be separated from the people they care about, told degrading things, terrorized, scared. And that long-term impact of emotional abuse is that people start to really think that the violence is their fault. They start to really internalize it, and it really does change and shape who we are as people, right? Especially for kids and young people, they're really trying to figure out who they are and what their place in the world. And if we have a child who's subjected to emotional abuse, that can really change our core beliefs about ourselves, and can be really impactful in the long run. In addition to children being the direct um, targets of specific kinds of emotional harm, mental harm, something that's not often, or not on something that occurs to people is that even children who are in situations where there's domestic violence or severe conflict in the home, forced isolation, restraint, where children are being afraid, but, they're spending a lot of time in their home afraid, where they might not necessarily be directly targeted, but they are in a situation where they're being afraid a lot, really does have a huge impact on children. And this also does fall under that duty to report. So even if a child is not direct being directly targeted. If we have parents who say, oh, well, they're sleeping or they don't hear if we're fighting or things like this, know that because of what we know from brain research about the impacts on emotional abuse, on violence on children, even just being in the home can have a profound effect on young people, which is why we want to make sure that we can provide as many supports as possible for young people. So know that that is also part of that emotional abuse umbrella for young people. So we're thinking about physical abuse. Often this is the one that people feel like they can understand and identify easiest. We're thinking about when a person in a position of power or trust purposefully injures or threatens to injure. So even a threat of harm is also considered physically abusive as well too. Um, and one way that often we sort of like check in or monitor for physical abuse is really looking at, bumps and bruises and scrapes and, looking at kids' bodies, right? And we want to remember that, healthy kids who are active, who are doing fun things and getting into the right kinds of troubles for little kids, that they're going to be doing lots of stuff and they're going to get bruises that are totally normal and totally appropriate, right? So thinking developmentally, what's an appropriate bruise for this kid, right? We think about little kids, I always think about toddlers, right? Especially toddlers who are walking really early. Some things that, often we'll see like bruises on their foreheads because they're bumping into stuff because they just don't have the, they're just not able to coordinate things as well, right? So a bruise on a forehead on a toddler might be a little bit more normal than one on, an older kid. But, we remember that often our limbs, like our arms and our legs, because of what we're doing. It's not uncommon to see bruises on kids' arms and legs, and that can be pretty normal. We always want to just sort of keep track of it. Bruises that might be a little bit more where we might go, a little bit more, tend to be the ones on the trunks of our bodies, right? Or on our faces. So especially like on the bum or on the inner thighs or on the thighs, those tend to be a little bit more, tend not to be as accidental or that happen in the course of the day. Although there are lots of kids who manage to do that as well too, right? So we don't want to jump to conclusions if we're seeing, a kid with a bruise or a scrape or things like this. But definitely we do want to monitor and notice this, especially if it happens a lot too. But when we're having conversations with kids, we want to give them a safe way of talking about things. We never want to give them leading language. And so if we see a bruise or abrasion or something that makes us, a little bit, just sort of makes us go, what's going on here? My favorite thing is always to just say to a kid like, hey, tell me the story about your bruise, right? So we're not asking like, who hurt you, what happened, all of these things. It's just more like, tell me the story about that. Like, how did you get that darn bruise, right? Because we don't want to seem like we're accusing anybody. Because especially if you ask a kid like, who hit you, right? Kids' brains, they want to please us. They want to do this. So even if it was like something like an accident, if we say a really leading question like that, they might just pull a name out of a hat, right? Just because we asked them for a name, even if a name didn't exist, right? So always like, tell me the story about what happened. Like, oh my goodness, like, wow, that's all of these things. So we want to just notice and pay attention to all of these things, especially when we're working. Hopefully we're outside and doing fun things, but that's just one thing to notice about young people. It's just those things. Those can sometimes give us some clues or make us think, there's a pattern that's going on here that I'm a little bit worried about. We can definitely document those things as well too, right? Um, So if we're thinking about physical neglect is really about, not having, not meeting a child's physical needs, right? So thinking about all of the things that a kid needs in order to be healthy and happy, right? All of those basic needs. So, nutrition, clothing, shelter, healthcare, protection from harm, boundaries, supervision. Those are things that are really important to kids and that are necessary for a child to be healthy. So if we're just thinking about those very specific things, if we start to notice that maybe a child is coming to our care, coming to our programming, who is chronically tired, maybe they're not dressed appropriately all of the time. Maybe they have a toothache that hasn't been addressed. They're not bathed as much, right? Those are some patterns of things that we want to take note of. Does somebody have a question there? I just unmuted. Okay, because often neglect is also another thing that tends to be underreported and really hard to notice as well too. So we want to just check in and just to notice these things, especially if we need to document them. The other thing we need to remember about physical neglect is that there's intentional and non-intentional, right? So we want to remember that some families just don't have the resources to provide the kids the necessities, right? And kids and families, they need more support than judgment, right? There's enough judgment out there to go around. So we want to remember that sometimes families are not, children aren't getting their needs met, not because the family doesn't want to, but because the family doesn't have the capacity. And that's a very different conversation about how do we connect that family to the supports and resources within the community to help them, to bring them in and just to give them a little support. The difference between intentional and non-intentional. So intentional would be, not letting a child have proper clothing as a punishment, or, not letting them sleep, or not bringing them to the dentist on time. So, there can be a couple of different contexts around that, but we don't want to just jump to the conclusion. If we notice that a child might be experiencing some sort of neglect, we don't want to jump to the conclusion that their caregivers are, purposely doing this. Sometimes it's a little bit bigger of an issue. Sometimes it's more of a systematic issue. And we just need to recognize that those can be very, very different. So sexual abuse, unfortunately, is something that is a reality for some children. And so this is the improper exposure of a child to sexual contact, sexual activity, or behavior. It can fall into two categories. So there's the contact and the non-contact. So the contact would be anything around touching, intercourse, exploitation. We have non-contact, which is can be technology, facilitated sexual abuse, bribery, luring, lots of different things that can fall, exposing a child to things that are inappropriate for them as well too. So, there can be some different things that are going on for young people. And this is something that something that's important for us that can be a really preventative thing as well too for young people, for children, especially for younger children, is making sure that when we are talking with their kids, that we're always using the proper names of all of our body parts, right? So if, because this can be a way that sometimes people can groom children into situations where there could be sexual abuse. Remembering that, we only have one word for elbow, and that nobody gets embarrassed about that. So we want to remember, especially names for genitalia as well too. We just want to be able to use those words and have children know that those are words, because that can be something that can be easily manipulated, especially people who are coercing children into situations of child abuse, or sexual abuse rather. It's not uncommon for them to rename their genitalia because nobody has told them the names, right? So just for example, work with the Sexual Assault Center, and one example, and this is unfortunately a very common one, where the family hasn't taught the child the proper names of their genitalia, and then somebody who wants to do harm renames it. So there was a situation where a child was groomed to refer to their genitalia as their toys. And so the kid would say to their teacher, hey, my uncle came over last weekend and played with my toys. And so you're thinking, oh, well, okay, playing with your toys. That sounds like a normal thing. And then later it was revealed that actually that person had groomed that child to call their genitalia their toys, so that when they disclosed, it wouldn't be believed or understood or heard. So something that we can do around that is just making sure that we're using the proper terminology around that. Also respecting children's physical boundaries, always asking permission, from a child, like if we want to hug them or give them a high five, or just around touching. We want to teach children that they are, that their bodies are their own, and that we are respectful of their boundaries, and that, they can make choices about their bodies as well too. So we're not forcing kids to hug other kids or do things, right? We're always asking permission and reinforcing that, children's bodies, regardless of their age, are their own, and they have agency over their bodies, and that, nobody is allowed to, do anything that they don't want to do, right? So some of the things that we can think about as well. Time here. So what can make it hard for a kid to ask for help? Right? Huge thing. You may have noticed that there's been a pandemic going on for a year and a half, right? It has definitely changed all of us in lots of different ways. For some kids, they've been mostly at home, and so they're not out as much. And so, we're not, as a community, we're not sort of getting as many eyes on families, right? We're not sort of noticing some of those things. So some kids also it might be harder for them to come into in-person programming when maybe they haven't been doing as much of that, or maybe they have been doing virtual school versus in-person school, right? So that's a thing. Or if you're doing a virtual programming, which is super cool, you don't have as much contact as well too, so it's a little bit of a different kind of a contact as well. Remembering that we as caregivers, supporters, mentors, teachers, we've also been impacted by the COVID isolation as well too, in lots of different ways. And we're just a little bit more anxious and a little bit more stressed. I know things are definitely feeling a little bit more hopeful right now, but recognize our own levels of stress and how that has impacted the work that we do. Sometimes it's because no one's asked a child, no one's questioned the child or given a child an opportunity to share. And so, it's okay for us to be checking in with kids like, hey, tell me the story about the bruise, or what's going on, those kinds of things. It's okay for us to be checking in on those things. Right? Like sometimes it's kids haven't been asked. Sometimes they lack the language or the definitions, right? So it could be like even just a language barrier. If you are working in a community where there's lots of kids or speaking lots of different languages, which is super fun, but also a little bit challenging in a different way, right? So maybe they just don't even have the language, or that, the words that you use are different from the words that they use. And so it could be we're all speaking the same language, but it could be that those definitions are different. So sometimes a kid will say something and we interpret it completely differently. Lacking control over processes. So this is really around, if a child is worried about what could happen if I share that I'm being hurt or harmed, worried about other people, that oh, I just realized I skipped one here though. That, sometimes people, will tell children, like, if you tell somebody this and this and this is going to happen, and it feels really hopeless and really powerless, because you're like, wow, it means all of my choices are going to be taken away. I'm not going to have this, which is a really, really scary thing for young people, for children. So they may be worried that, that things are going to come to pass that is going to make it really, really hard or difficult, or people are going to get into trouble that they don't want to get into trouble. They are often told that, if you tell somebody, then it's, it's going to be your fault for, sending me to jail. It's going to be your fault for this, right? So there's a lot of unknowns for young people. And so it can be really, really scary. Sorry, I realized I skipped over this one here too, not being heard or believed, right? Sometimes young people disclose and we just maybe we don't hear them or maybe don't understand them. Maybe sometimes they tell us things that are just so hard to hear that we just don't believe them, not because we don't care, but just because they sound, maybe they're rooted in truth, but they're not exactly a story that sounds believable, right? Sometimes young people are just like disclose, but we're not able to pick up on what's going on. We're not able to hear them understand the things that they're saying. So sometimes young people are disclosing, but we might not fully understand what's happening. They might not know that there's, especially for parents as well too, that there are, ways that, people who can help, that there's supports for families. They just might not know that anybody would help, right? Because many times children are told nobody will help you. So they may not understand that. Something else that's also super common is ineffectual responses from adults, right? So they could have maybe something happened in their past and they actually did tell somebody, and then that person didn't follow through. Maybe their trust, oops, yeah, maybe their trust was broken in that situation. Maybe that, things happen and everything was really, really terrible for a long time, right? So it could be that, there was, what happened was really, really harder than the thing that happened. So maybe they might not even tell because they might think, well, nobody's going to help me anyway. Because I told in the past and it was really, really terrible, or nobody did anything, right? So we want to remember that if a child discloses, we want to do the best that we can to support that child. So there's a couple of different ways that we often receive disclosures from kids. So there is verbal or purposeful. So that is really like on purpose and they're telling you something. Or there's nonverbal and accidental. So nonverbal could be us noticing signs, documenting those things, paying attention. It could be accidental. Maybe somebody accidentally blurts something out. Maybe somebody else, maybe it's third party information. And so, we always want to check in. We don't want to make assumptions about third party people, sharing information, but it's usually not on purpose, right? It's usually an accident. So there's a couple of different ways. I know for myself, and I think for Erin as well too, that often when kids disclose, it sounds pretty similar, in that many times young people will say, "I want to tell you something, but you have to promise to keep it a secret." Right? That is super common, right? It's a super common thing. And we want to remember that we can never keep secrets with children, especially about children who are experiencing harm, right? That is not a promise that we can keep. So we don't want to promise a child that, right? We shouldn't also, secrets are not appropriate with children as well, too, right? So, if a child shares, like, I have something I want to tell you, but you have to promise not to tell anyone, there's lots of different ways we can respond to that, because we want to make sure that we're not promising to keep things a secret, but we also want to let the child know that we're not going to, you know, you know, hurt their trust and say, oh yeah, keep it a secret. Oh, by the way, I have to tell everybody, right? So we can say, wow, okay, well, I'm not allowed to keep secrets, but I'd really love to hear what you have to say. Or if you tell me something and I'm worried about you, I actually have to tell somebody else too. I might need to get some help from another adult, right? Trying to think, is there any other brilliant things that you've done in response, Erin, as our Boys and Girls Club, Big Sister, Big Brothers? Just anything we can do. Oh, I can't hear you. Is that just me? I don't know. I can't hear you, my friend. I'm not sure what's going on there. So sorry, I don't know what's happening. Anyway, I'm sure she'll write something brilliant in the chat there. But just remembering that we can't keep secrets from children, that if a child says, I need you to keep this a secret, that we need to let them know we can't keep things a secret. And of course, we also want to respect that if we say to a child, like, I'd love to hear what you have to say, but I can't keep secrets. And if they say, okay, well, I'm not going to tell you, that, we want to be respectful for that child. Maybe that child is just trying to figure out if we're a safe person. So if they do say something like this, maybe it's just going to be about, like, we're getting my mom a really nice dress for her birthday, or it could be something else. So that might be one of those things that we do need to take note of, that we do need to pay attention, that we do need to document, and maybe let other people know that there might be a disclosure coming from this child as well. Oh, technology is funny. Hey, Erin. um, so thinking about responding to disclosures here. So what happens if, oh, sorry, Erin has just said something here. You can let them know that if it harms themselves or something else, you can't keep it a secret, as you want everybody to be safe. And that's a really, really great one. Thanks for that, Erin. I love that one. Thanks. I'm like, I did notice that little thing here too. So thinking about how do we respond to disclosures? What happens if a child tells us something that we're like, holy macaroni, right? It's really important that we're really calm about it. So this is where, if you have the opportunity, if you have a theater background, that's great. Or if you have a chance to practice, having a calm face while people tell you things. This is we want to make sure that in our face, we don't respond in a way that's going to make them scared or nervous, or whatever. If they share with us that they've experienced harm, that they need help, we don't want to come up with like a, oh my gosh face, or ooh, right? Because that can be like really, really hard, really, really scary for that child as well too, right? It's so brave for a kid to share with us. We want to, just as much as possible, be focusing on, like, keep your face soft, keep your face just neutral and soft. It's really important. Um, Also, being an active listener, right? This is about just listening to the information, also paying attention so that we can document what the child says to us, right? Just listening to what they are saying, thanking the child for sharing that. Listening, and when we're documenting, we need to make sure that we are keeping track of what the child says so that we can properly report it. And we want to make sure that in our documentation, we're using the language of the child. That's really important. So if a child discloses to us that, after dinner, my parents have wobbly pops that make them really angry and scary, then we're not going to say something like, parents are drinking alcohol and scaring children, right? That's not what the child says. We want to use the words of the child, right? We're not here to interpret what the child is saying. We're just here to document what the child is saying. So kind of be like a scientist, right? So we want to document things we see. We want to document things we hear, things that are told to us. We don't want to make any inferences or any opinions. This is not about our opinion about the things that are going on. It is very much about what is actually seen and heard. And of course, we want to let the child lead. We are not here to do an investigation when a child discloses to us. We are not CSI. We are not Sherlock Holmes. We are really around just hearing the information. It's not, I'm assuming that most of us don't, I'm assuming that nobody here works for Children's Services. If you do, you have a different job, but that it's not our job to do those probing questions. That can really kind of mess up further investigations if we're doing those probing questions. So we're not going to be like, well, tell me what happened, what's going on, blah, 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 all of these things. So we're not asking questions about leading things. We can ask questions about, how children are feeling. That's totally a normal thing, right? Or, like, that's a safe thing to be like, how are you feeling? How, thank you for sharing that with me, all of those things. But we don't want to ask any leading questions. It's not our place. Something that's like so important, probably the most important thing that we can do is just reassure the child that it's not their fault, right? This is not your fault. You did not cause this. This was you, this was not your fault. It wasn't, you know, we just want to, like, I believe you, it's not your fault. Um, Many times children will be told that they won't be believed, that, you know, if something happens, that it's going to be their fault, right? That so we want to make sure that we're not reinforcing that, and also just developmentally, the way that children sort of interpret the world, they really, you may have noticed this, they really do, you know, they really do think that they're the center of the universe, and that's on purpose developmentally, right? But because of that sort of outlook on the world, they think, and depending on where they are developmentally, they often think that their thoughts cause the things that are happening outside of them. So they may already be internalizing that these scary things that are going on are my fault. So we always want to reinforce to children, it wasn't your fault, I believe you. So important to reinforce this for children, that the harm was not their fault, they did not cause it. Um, and I was really glad that Dr. Gale talked a lot about practicing self-care, because especially in a situation like this, it can be really, really hard to hear disclosure, to hear that child is being harmed. It's really hard on our hearts, right? So thinking about some of the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves, you know, to just make sure that we can stay calm and relaxed, and, you know, what are some of those things we can do to care for ourselves? And as well as, you know, self-care is really important, but the other piece that's actually just as important as self-care is this piece around community care. And so how do we get the supports from our community? How do we provide supports for our community, right? So thinking about, you know, if somebody discloses or we have a hard day, you know, is there a colleague that we can debrief with? Of course, in a very confidential and safe way. We're not going to dump all of the information. We can just talk about how we're feeling. Do we have a supervisor that we can check in with? If we don't have access to those things, you know, looking at, you know, what are some of the free mental health supports if we don't have that already available to us? You know, 211, the mental health action plan, right? Checking in on that community care and making sure that we're just looking out for each other, because we do need to support each other in order to support children and families. Um, and of course, if we hear any disclosure, we have to report. This is information that we don't have a choice around sharing. So we'll get to that, the duty report, in just one second. But do know that, you know, if there is a disclosure, that, you know, we are responsible for making those reports. Um, Here's my little thingy here. And you know that children are protected in lots of different ways, right? So here in Alberta, we have the Child, Youth and Protection, Child, Youth, Family. Oh, it's on the next slide here. We do have our protection orders. Oh, the brain today. But you know that children are protected by international frameworks, national, provincial frameworks. Internationally, we have the UN Conventions on the Rights of the Child. So that is a framework in place to protect all children. You know, provincially, we do have laws that, you know, federally, provincially, we do have laws that protect children. Also thinking about what is our organization's process around what happens when there's a disclosure? What are, you know, do we have a child protection policy within our organization as well too? If we hear a disclosure, what's the process? Do I need to check in with my supervisor? Do I need to fill out particular paperwork? All very reasonable things. Sometimes there can be some confusion in organizations around reporting. And so it's really the person who's the closest to the disclosure who needs to do the reporting. Sometimes organizations have extra things that you need to do in order to, you know, just ensure that, you know, make sure that, you know, people are aware of what's going on. So it could be around connecting with our supervisors to let them know what's going on. Totally reasonable, but remembering that the person who's the closest to the disclosure is the one who needs to do the disclosure and needs to do the official report. But yeah, think about what's happening. What are some of the protections in my organization? Do we have a specific, you know, policy around child protection that recognizes the vulnerability of children? How are rules shared with families and children? What are some of those? What's the paperwork that I have to do in addition to the formal reporting? So duty report is that, we all have a responsibility for keeping children safe and well, that you are legally bound, that if you are over 18 and you, have reasonable or probable grounds to believe a child is being sexually abused, physically injured, emotionally harmed, which is also in emotionally harmed also includes being in a family where there's domestic violence or neglected. Under the Child, Youth, and Family Enhancement Act, you do have a legal requirement to make that report. The person who is the closest to the information is the best person to make the report. These are three different ways that you can make reports. So there's the Child Abuse Hotline, which is the Alberta-wide one. Here locally in Edmonton, this is the number for Children's Services, or you can connect with your local police or RCMP. Those are all three different ways that you can do that report. And you can report anonymously. That is something that is a choice. It's not always seen as the best choice, just because sometimes if something goes to an investigation or somebody needs to do some follow-up, they may need to connect with you and ask you some follow-up questions. Maybe something's changed since you reported. Those are all really important things. And know that if a person makes a report, the information about who has made the report is actually sealed, so nobody can share that information. Even if it goes to court, the names of the people who did the reporting will never ever be shared, and that's to let people know that it's safe to do a report, that we're not going to share the information, because we want to make sure that if a child or a family needs help or support, that people are going to make those disclosures and going to be connecting in that way to do that. So yeah, you can also connect with Children's Services. So say you have something that's happening, and you can even do a consultation as well too. Say, hypothetically, if this were to happen, right, you can make those connections as well and just check in, and potentially that might lead to reporting or not. But that, if you have reasonable or probable grounds, you don't even have to have like concrete evidence, but if you're concerned about a child, then you can make that report. And the earlier that a child or family has intervention, the more help and support that we'll be able to give that family to help them along with their healing journey or their journey of what's going on. So just a couple of things here, things to remember that we can say to kids. There are always good things to say, like, thank you for telling me, I'm here for you. You did nothing wrong. You're really brave. It wasn't your fault. I believe you. These are all really, really powerful things that we can reiterate to children, or anybody really, because often people are getting the opposite messages from that. So a couple of resources here too for everyone. So if you're not familiar with 211, it's often the number I give to people because it's the easiest one to remember. As you can tell, sometimes my brain has little shorts. So it's 211 is the easiest, and that one's operated by the Canadian Mental Health Association. Oh my gosh, I did it again. Anyway, it is the one they run. They run the distress line here in Edmonton, and they really are trained on if you have questions about social services in your community, but they can also help with if somebody's experiencing harm. They have training in, we have 2 minutes here. They have training in violence prevention, lots of good things. So Children's Services, if you're working with an Indigenous family, you can connect with Métis and Indigenous Children's Services. The Today Center, if it's about a family, it's about a parent who's experiencing harm. Sexual Assault Center, of course, and then I just put the cyber tips there with some information about technology. And we just have less than 2 minutes. Sorry, friends, I babbled on there a little bit more. So does anybody, that's a lot of information, my friends. Thank you so much for all being here. Does anybody have any questions before we all join the main room and finish? Yes, Janelle?
Actually, I don't know if you mentioned it, but I just wanted to clarify. Say you receive a disclosure from a child that doesn't necessarily involve the immediate family members. After the child discloses to you, can you tell the child, I might have to talk to your parents? And do you share with the parents or do you not?
It depends on the situation. Not necessarily. I would just default to doing I mean, you could always do a what's it called, like a consultation with children's services. There's no obligation for you to do to tell the parents. Sometimes it's not. I guess it just depends. Every situation is different, so I guess it just depends on your relationship with that family. But you're not under a legal obligation to tell the family that you have to do disclosure. You're not legally obligated, but your relationship might dictate whether or not you have that discussion. It depends. Often people ask me questions and I'm always like, this is the black, this is the white, this is the rainbow in which we operate, right? So that might be something where you want to maybe connect with a community colleague, a supervisor, and how to proceed. Ultimately, you would still do that disclose like that. But anything additionally, that would be something that you could maybe get some support around that.